Welcome back. My name's Jesse. I'm a 23-year-old full-time accountant trying to make $10,000 playing low-stakes poker in 2026. Current results are right here. We're doing pretty good so far. Let's keep it going. I'll have to play some cards. And we're back, playing 1-3 at Moneymakers where we buy in for the max of $500. The first interesting hand of the day, we look down at pocket 7s from the low jack and bump it up to 15. The cutoff, button, big blind, and under the gun player all call, so we go 5 ways to the flop of jack, 8, 7, all spades. It checks to me, and I decided to just check, as 5 ways on a monotone flop is a little scary. The button now puts out a bet of $20, and the big blind calls. It's way too early for me to fold, but I think raising here might be overplaying my hand a little bit, so I decided to just flick in the call. Off to the turn, which is the deuce of diamonds. The big blind checks, and I decided to check here as well, thinking if the button has a flush, he's gonna keep betting, right? And if he goes for a large sizing, maybe he just lets us off the hook. The button does keep betting, but only for a small size of 25. The big blind folds, so what is the button's range? I don't think he has a flush here. If he did have a flush, would he really only go 25? Probably not, so I think his range consists of like jack X, maybe with a spade. I don't think that would fold if I put in a check raise here, so that's probably what I should have done. But in game, first hand of the day, I was playing passive, and I decided to just call. So yeah, a little bit of a misplay on my part, I think. But off to the river, which is the 6 of hearts. Here, I think I make another mistake by just checking again. My opponent's range is capped to jack X at best, and I think a jack will just check it back a large percentage of the time, so that means I should be leading here with my value. But, in game, I wasn't on top of it yet, and I decided to check, and he just quickly checked it back. And I, of course, won at showdown. So yeah, we missed some value in this one, but still nice to scoop our first pot of the day. So we missed value on the last hand, but we're not going to make the same mistake twice. The low jack limped when I looked down at pocket 8s from the hijack and decided to bump it up to 15. The cutoff and low jack call, so 3 ways to the flop of king, 10, deuce, 2 diamonds. The low jack checks, and my hand's basically just showdown value at this point, so I see no reason to bet, and I check, and the cutoff checks as well. Off to the turn, which pairs the board in another 10. The low jack checks, and again for the same reason as before, I don't want to bet, so I check, and it checks through yet again. Off to the river, which is the 8 of hearts. So we make a full house, and now the low jack leads out for a bet of 35. So what's his range? This particular opponent is the tightest at the player. I've seen him check down sets and many other clear value hands, so I do not think he is going for thin value on this river. This means that the worst hand I think he can have is a 10. So if I was bluffing here, how much would I have to bet to get a 10 to fold? Well, this player is quite fold happy, so I don't think I can go too big. I think a bet of like 250 would honestly get him to fold. So for that reason, my sizing with value should be a little bit smaller than that, and I throw out a bet of 175. The cutoff folds, and the low jack thinks for a little bit, and then puts in a call. I show my boat, and we're good. So pretty happy with my river sizing here, though I think next time I might even consider going a little bigger. I just gotta work on calibration with this particular opponent and seeing how big he will call. This next hand, under the gun limps, when I look down at pocket king from the low jack and decide to bump it up to 15. It folds to the big blind, who then min raises to 30. Under the gun then calls the $30, so I think this is a mandatory 4-bet when it gets back to me. The big blind only had like 220 behind, so I decided to bump it up to a size of 150. I like doing this size because if I were to just rip it all in for his whole stack of 220, he might find some folds. But using this slightly smaller size, I feel like it often just baits players into going all in with a lot of weaker holdings that wouldn't feel comfortable just calling, but are happy to put it in. This is exactly what ends up happening, as the big blind does end up shoving all in and the under the gun player folds. I of course call, and the big blind says he wants to run it once, and then he flips over pocket aces. Man, do we need some help. Off to the run out.
1 out of 20 times.
Okay, I'm dead. Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, yeah, so basically flopped is dead. So, nice hand to our opponent. And we move on to the next one, where we look down at pocket aces. Okay, it seems our luck may be turning around. And, everyone folded pre-flop. Well, that's pretty sad. At least the guy we doubled up hasn't left yet, so we still have a chance to get back some of our money and... Oh wait, he racked up immediately and left. Okay, well, that was a little unfortunate. But then we looked down at pocket queens. Okay, things are looking up. We're in the low jack and we bump it up to 15. The cutoff calls, and then the button raises it to a small size of 35. Not really sure what he's doing that with, but I think our hand's still good enough to go for a 4-bet. The button only has like 200 in his stack, so similar spot to the pocket king's hand, where I decided to bump it up to 115, hoping to bait him into shoving all in. Then the cutoff snap 5-bet rips it for $516. The button folds, so what is the cutoff's range? He just flatted my original $15 open, with only the button and blinds left to act behind him. Would he really do this with a hand like pocket aces or kings? I don't really think so, to be honest. This shove felt to me like a hand like ace king, maybe ace queen, or pocket pairs jacks and lower. Then the cutoff says this.
You really want to call.
So I listened to the man and I put in the call. He flipped over pocket tens and said he wanted to run it once. So we made the correct call. Now we just need the dealer to keep it clean.
Me, twice.
Heart? Oh, that's not a good flop. Okay. Nice hand, sir. And I'm gonna be honest, I think me from a year ago probably would have been tilted out of my mind. But I've played a lot more poker now, and I've been on both sides of this before, so I know it's just a part of the game. My mental was actually pretty good still, so I added on for another $500 and decided to keep grinding. This brings us to our next hand, where we look down at pocket kings from the small blind. The hijack raised to 12, then the cutoff and button called. This is a mandatory 3-bet, so I bumped it up to 55, and the original raiser is the only caller. Heads up to the flop of 9-3 deuce with 2 hearts. My hand is thick value at this point, and I just want to go bet to get the money in. So I start out with a small bet of 45, hoping if he does happen to have a set on this wet dynamic flop, he'll raise and he'll let me off the hook. I'm feeling pretty good when he just calls. That is, until the turn is the queen of hearts. So what's my opponent's range? He can have some flushes, random queen X to float to the flop, some smaller pocket pairs like jacks and tens, and finally some draws like the naked ace of hearts. There's like 210 in the middle, and I have a little over 600 in my stack and he covers me. I had a lot of thoughts running through my head on this turn, and let me tell you why. I wanted to bet a size that is small enough that flushes would be tempted to raise, small enough that the ace of hearts, or jacks and pocket tens with a heart still wants to call, while still being big enough to set up a nice SPR for a river shove should he have a hand like ace queen. This is one of those things that I just need to practice to get faster at, because I don't want to slow down the game thinking for a long time. In game, I only thought for like 15 seconds, which I thought was pretty quick, before I decided on a sizing of 110. Not sure if this is the best size, to be honest, as it doesn't set up the best SPR for a shove on the river, but I went 110 and the hijack calls. So off to the river, which pairs the board in the 3 of spades. And I actually really like this card. Players tend to get a lot more sticky when the board pairs. There's 430 in the middle, and I now have exactly $500 behind. I didn't quite get the SPR to be less than 1, but on this board pairing river, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable trying to get a hand like ace queen to fold. So with that in mind, I of course go all in. The hijack thinks for a little bit, and then he puts in the call. I show my kings, and we are good. My opponent said he thought I was bluffing with ace king, and he called us with the queen, so we win a very nice pot. This next one's pretty fun. Under the gun limped, and it folds to me in the button where I look down at queen 7 of clubs, and decided to bump up my hand to 15. Big blind and under the gun call, so 3-ways to a flop of ace 4-3 rainbow. It checks to me, and I don't really like c-betting on the static ace-high boards without an ace, so I check, hoping to get more information about my opponent's range on the turn. The turn is the jack of clubs, and it quickly checks to me. I think both opponents are now capped, having checked twice. The best hand I think they can have is a weak ace-x, then they just have a bunch of random pairs lower than an ace. I want that range to call once and then fold the river, so I throw out a bet of 25. The big blind folds and the under the gun player calls. Off to the river, which is the 9 of spades. Under the gun checks, and I think his range is pretty much the same as before. It only improved if he has ace 9 or jack 9 specifically. If I wanted to get called by an ace, the biggest I think I could go here is something like 150. So here with queen high, I decided to throw out a bet of 210. He does quickly fold, and I return my cards face down to the dealer. In this next one, there is a $6 button straddle. 2 players called when I looked down at jack 10 of clubs from the cutoff and decided to bump it up to $40. The button said I stole his move and then 3-bet me to 115. We're like 300 big blinds deep, so I decided to flick in the call with my playable hand to see a flop out of position. The flop comes 10-8-3 with 2 hearts. Out of position, I check, and the butt-off thinks for a while before just checking it back. I'm immediately feeling a lot better about my hand, as I would never expect him to check any overpairs on this wet dynamic board. So off to the turn, which is the 8 of hearts. So what's my opponent's range? I don't think he has any flushes, as I would have expected a hand like ace-king of hearts to bet on that flop. Nor do I really think this player has much 8x in his 3-bet range. I think my hand is best, and I want to get some value from hands like ace-king or ace-queen with ace of hearts. So I lead out for a bet of 125, but unfortunately he does just fold. This brings us to our next hand. 2 players limp to me before I looked down at queen-jack offsuit from middle position and decided to bump it up to $20. Little loose, yeah, but this table is playing very passive, which allowed me to just open up my starting range a little bit. The cutoff in both limpers call, so 4 ways to a flop of king 10-8 with 2 diamonds. It checks to me, and I'm just happy to see a free card with my straight draw, so I check, and it checks through. Off to the turn, which pairs the board in the king of hearts. Under the gun now leads for a bet of 30. This is your typical 1-3 player who just wouldn't bet anything worse than a king here. Under the gun +1 folds, and I decided to flick in a call with my open-ended straight draw, thinking we'll probably make a lot of money when we do hit our hand. The cutoff folds, so heads up to the river, which is a beauty in the ace of spades. Under the gun now puts out a bet of 35. I'm feeling very confident in my read that he's got trips. If he had a boat, I think he might get a little more greedy on this river. This player is similar to our opponent in the hand where we rivered the boat with pocket 8s, except I think he is a little bit more sticky. The amount I would have to go to get him to fold a king here is something like 350, 400. With that in mind, I decided to throw out a bet of $300, and he snap calls. I turn over my hand, and we are good versus his king 6. With how fast he called, I think he's a little bit more sticky than I even thought. And I probably could have gotten away going something like 400 or 500 here, but still happy to be scooping in a nice pot. In this next one, we look down at pocket kings from the small blind. 2 players limped before the button raised to 15. I think a 3-bet is in order, so I bump it up to 50 bucks. The under the gun player now cold called my 3-bet, and this brought the button along as well. So 3 ways to a flop of queen 10-9 with 2 clubs. Not the best of boards, to be honest, but I still think my hand is good enough to go for value, and I'll just get a little bit squeamish if someone raises. I throw out a small C bet of 55, just hoping to entice anyone to raise their stronger hands. Under the gun calls, and the button folds, so heads up to the turn, which is the 4 of clubs. The under the gun player is pretty shallow with only like 212 behind. I think the best play here is probably just a shove. I think we are best here a large percentage of the time, and even if we are behind, we have plenty of outs to improve. But in game, I decided to check, and under the gun checks it back. Off to the river, which is the ace of diamonds. I hate this card, to be honest, as I think it interacts well with the under the gun player. So I check, and he snap shoves all in. Now, I am very bad at live tells and picking up reads. It's not really something I ever look for, but occasionally I do try asking questions just for a little bit of fun. And this is what he said. Did you need the ace?
Yeah, the ace helped out a lot. And I'll show you.
Ace jack.
I'm not bullshitting. No.
So yeah, I believed him when he said that ace helped, and I just tossed my hand in the muck, and he showed me ace 6 offsuit. So thank you for giving me that information, sir. And also, you cold called my $50 3-bet preflop with ace 6 offsuit? Alright, this is the same player who I doubled up with the queens versus 10s earlier, and he's already lost like half of it. So yeah, I don't think I'm gonna leave until I get the rest of this guy's stack. This next one's pretty fun. Under the gun limps when I look down at 8-9 of clubs from the hijack and bump it up to 20 bucks. The hijack called, then the small blind 3-bet, but to a very small size of 55. He's pretty shallow, but I'm quite deep with the hijack player, so I put in the call, and the hijack calls as well. 3 ways to a flop of king 8 deuce rainbow. So we flop middle pair, and the small blind checks to me. I don't really see much of a reason to be betting, so I check, and it checks through. Turn is the 6 of diamonds, and now the small blind puts out a bet of 75, leaving him with only 142 behind. A little context for this player is that he was visibly a little bit tilted and tired and seemed that he was just ready to go home. I don't think he would ever, in that state, check a king on the flop, so I think my hand's probably best. I am a little bit worried about the player behind me. If I just call, he could also call with something better, or he could even raise, which would be a nightmare. My hand doesn't want to raise now and let the small blind off the bluffing hook, so I decided to just call, and luckily the hijack does fold. Off to the river, which is the king of hearts. The small blind does as expected and shoves all in. This second king actually made me feel a little bit better, as it makes it less likely he had a king. So I stuck to my plan, having given him rope, and I flick in the call, and we are good. This next hand, there is a $6 button straddle, and the small blind bumped up to 15. I looked down at ace-10 offsuit from the big blind, and playing only 5-handed at this point, I was happy to 3-bet this one up to 45. The cutoff then called our 3-bet, which brought along both the button and the small blind. So 4 ways to the flop of queen, 10, 10. So we flop trips in a bloated pot. Lovely spot. The small blind checks, and I decided to throw out a c-bet of 75. The cutoff calls, and everyone else folds. Off to the turn, which is the 8 of hearts. The cutoff only has 237 behind, and with how this guy has been playing, I don't really think he has a fold button, and I think he'll call an all-in with any queen, or probably even just a flush draw. So I shove, and he pretty quickly calls. He has queen 9, and he can improve, and we end up getting back a lot of what we gave him with that pocket queen's hand. The table immediately breaks after this though, as there were only 4 of us left, and they didn't want to play 4-handed. So let's go hear my post-session thoughts. Alright, just wrapped up that session. I played for like 6.5 hours, so quite a long session for me. And we did great. I'm really proud of the way I played this session, I'm not gonna lie. We lost that all-in early, kings versus aces. Then we lost the next all-in, that queens versus 10s, and I didn't let it get to me. I kept a good mental, and I'm proud of the way I played. You know, I lost $700 all in pre-flop, just getting unlucky. And I still won on this session. So the numbers. I was in the game for 1,000, and I cashed out for 24.90. So almost 1,500 bucks. For how unlucky we got on those all-ins, I'm ecstatic. That's an amazing result. But yeah, I got another session for you, so don't go anywhere. Session 2. Alright, we are back playing 1-3 where we buy in for the max of $500. First hand, we look down at ace-10 offsuit from the big blind. Under the gun open to 15, then under the gun +1 and the small blind called. I'm not a big fan of 3-betting a strong under the gun range with an easily dominated hand like this, but closing the action, I decided to flick in the call. Off to the flop, which comes 7, 8, 9 rainbow. I check and flow to the aggressor, who also checks, and now under the gun +1 throws out a bet of $40. The small blind folds, so what are my opponent's range? Under the gun is capped, as he checked with only 1 player behind him, and +1 is uncapped as he bet into 3 players. I have an open ender, and I decided to just call, which brought in the original raiser as well. Off to the turn, which is an offsuit queen. I check, under the gun checks, and +1 keeps firing for a small bet of 50. I think this small sizing caps him a little bit, as I would expect his nutted hands to go larger. So what should I do with my hand? Check raising could be nice, as I think both players are capped, and I can probably get a lot of folds. But in game, I thought of a pretty cheeky line where I decided to just call on this turn, hoping to drag along the under the gun player to then lead jam most rivers. So I call, and the under the gun player does call as I hoped, so off to the river, which is a beauty in the 6 of diamonds. So I hit my draw, and now my plan has to change. Instead of jamming to get both players to fold a hand like 9x, I want to size down to get called. In game though, I chose a sizing of 225, which I think is just too big. This is not a good run out for my opponents, and I think I should have sized down to something like 120 if I wanted to get a crying call from a 9. I was excited that I hit my draw and didn't have to bluff at it anymore, so I went to 225, and both players do unfortunately just fold. I'm still stacking up my chips from that last hand when I look down at King Jack offsuit from the small blind. The cutoff and button limped, and I decided to raise the price of the flop to $20. The big blind and button call, so 3 ways to the flop of Jack 10 9 with 2 spades. Pretty nice to flop top pair, but out of position to 2 opponents on a wet dynamic board, I check, just expecting them to stab a lot. The big blind obliges and puts out a bet of 25. The button folds, so what's the big blind's range? He's uncapped, which means he can have all the really strong hands like straights and 2 paired. My hand is thin value, so I decided to just call and see what he does on the turn. Off to the turn, which is the ace of spades. A pretty yucky card, so I check, and I'm happy to see my opponent checks it back. Off to the river, which comes the deuce of clubs. I think my opponent is now capped, as he would never check back a flush. So what happens if I bet? Well, I'll get called by anything better, and will likely fold out anything worse. If it goes check-check, I think we win quite a bit, which is perfectly fine to me. But if I check, it also gives him a chance to bluff at it. So I check, and he obliges and puts out a small bet of 40. I stick to my bluff catching plan and put in the call, and we win! My opponent had queen jack, and we scoop in our second pot in a row to start off this session. Following that last hand, a new PLO game started, and it unfortunately did just break my table, so I swapped over to a new 1-3 table, which is why there's a different camera angle. The first hand we get into in this new table, the cutoff limps when I look down at ace-queen offsuit on the button and decide to bump it up to 15. I keep defaulting to 15, but I see no reason why I shouldn't be raising it to 20 here. What hands would call a $15 raise that wouldn't call 20? But anyway, I made it 15 and the cutoff calls. Off to the flop, which comes jack-9 deuce with 2 clubs. If there's one flop in all of poker I know how to play, it's this one. If you know, you know. He checks, and I put out a c-bet of 15. He calls, so off to the turn, which is the 8 of clubs, completing the front door flush. He checks, so what's his range? Well, his range was capped when he just called on the wet dynamic flop. But I think he is now uncapped on this turn, as he can have a lot of flushes or straights. So I want to bet a size small enough to recap him and bring a weak range to the river to then bluff with a big bet. I decide on a sizing of 25, and he puts in the call. I'm mentally preparing to blast on this river, when the dealer then puts out the ace of hearts. So I make top pair, and now the cutoff leads for a bet of 50. My immediate thoughts was, shoot, he has a hand like ace-9 that hit 2 pair on this river. I think that is possible sometimes, but I'd argue he would have bet a little bit bigger with that hand. This half pot sizing just screamed bluff to me, so I didn't take too long before I decided to flick in a call. My opponent was reluctant to show his cards, so I just fast rolled my hand and mucked. Some people say you should never show first, as he is technically supposed to show his hand, but I'd rather be nice and keep this player happy and at the table rather than forcing him to show whatever hand he decided to bluff this river with. The next hand we get into is a PLO double board bomb pot, where we look down at queen jack 10-9. It's a pretty hand that gets even better when the top board comes ace king queen. So we flop the nuts on that board, and then the bottom board comes 7-8-9. So we also flop the nuts on that board. Under the gun +1 announces pot, so a bet of 135. It folds to me, and I decide to just call, thinking, we've got the nuts on both boards, and there's no flush draws available, so I'd love for anyone else at the table to call. But it folds all the way to the button, who then repots it. Under the gun +1 then goes all in for less, and at this point my only move is to go all in, and the button calls. Me and the button both end up having jack 10, and I don't really remember what under the gun +1 had, but it wasn't jack 10, so me and the button just chop up his money, and we win like $100 in this hand. In this next hand, the hijack opened to 10, and the cutoff called. I looked down at ace jack from the button, and decided to 3-bet to 40. Both players call, so 3-raise to the flop of jack 7-3. It checks to me, and I put out a c-bet of 45. Both players fold, so you're like, Jesse, why are you showing me this hand? Well, look at this. The cutoff player flashes me 7 deuce before he folds. He did this 2 other times, with 7 deuce once and 6-9 offsuit the other. So this guy was an action player who was calling way too wide pre-flop. This is an opponent we want to keep at the table. This leads us to our next hand, where there's a $10 button straddle. Our 7 deuce friend from the last hand called in the small blind for 10, when I looked down at king jack of clubs from the big blind, and I decided to raise it up to 40. It folds back to the small blind player, who limp raises me to 160. I'm in position versus an aggressive opponent with 40% of a royal flush. So what should I do? If you thought anything except for fold was the correct answer, you'd be wrong. Just because this is an action player doesn't mean he can't wake up with a good hand. He had been limp calling with all of his weak hands, and this was the first time I saw him raise, and he went giant. This is a clear fold, so I obviously don't take my own advice and call. Well shoot, Jesse, what are you doing? Hopefully we don't get a piece of the flop, and the flop is jack high. And then the small blind shoves all in for 312. This guy is screaming to me that he has a strong hand. Surely only having top pair on a monotone board will give me another chance to even think about it and fold, right? No, I called. Okay, maybe he's bluffing? No, he's not bluffing. He had pocket kings. We can't improve on the run out, and we punted $500. Okay, well that was annoying. But But I'm gonna lock in now, right? I'm not gonna punt anymore, right? I guess we're about to find out, because 15 minutes later, I look down at pocket jacks from under the gun, and I bump it up to 15. The low jack called, and the cutoff decided to 3-bet it to $70. It folds to me, and I decide to just call rather than 4-bet my jacks, and the low jack folds. So heads up to the flop of 7-6 deuce rainbow. Okay, pretty good flop for jacks, but out of position I check, and the cutoff puts out a large c-bet of 125. So what's his range? He can have all the overpairs. I would expect him to play like this. Plus, he can also have hands like ace-king or ace-queen that might just be betting large once on this flop and will give up if I call. Facing that range, I think my only move is to call and evaluate the turn, so that's what I do. The turn is the 9 of diamonds. Okay, still pretty good for jacks, but still out of position. I decided to check again, and my opponent now checks it back, off to the river, which is the deuce of hearts. So far, this hand has been pretty reasonable. We haven't punted yet, but this river is where it goes off the rails. Let me tell you my in-game thought process on this river that explains why I did what I did, and then let me tell you why my thought process was completely flawed. What is my opponent's range getting to this river? I think it's the exact same range as the range we gave him on the flop, as his overpairs can easily check back the turn for pot control. The natural thing to do is check it over my opponent. But in game, I decided to lead out for a small blocker type bet of 125, and let me tell you what I was thinking. If my opponent has overpairs greater than jacks, he's gonna find a bet on this river if I check it over, and it likely would be something much bigger than 125. Most recreational players don't raise thinly enough for value on the river, so I think they would likely just call my 125 so we would lose less to their overpairs. Now what about the portion of their range that has ace-king or ace-queen? I never expect them to call this small bet. The idea here is that they will perceive this bet as weakness and occasionally spaz raise as a bluff. And if I do not think they are likely to raise with value, I can have a profitable bluff catching opportunity on this river if they do decide to raise my 125. So that's what happened on this river. I bet 125, he shoved all in for like 600, and I called. Now let me tell you why my idea was flawed. Yes, I still think recreational players might not raise for value if I block bet on this river. But what would happen if I checked it over to them? Their overpairs will bet, yes, but what about ace-king? Your typical 1-3 players underbluff, and will probably convince themselves that they have some kind of showdown value with a hand like ace-king and check it back. So on this river, if I check and they bet large, I can probably just fold. But if they bet small, then I could probably consider bluff catching. I think that is a better line. But back to the hand with my actual opponent, who is not a recreational player, and in fact is one of the competent regs who I've played with on several occasions. He's someone who is able to find a raise on the river with overpairs for value facing my block bet. And that's exactly what happened. I bet 125, he shoved, I called, and he showed pocket kings, and I lost my whole stack. So that's 2 punts in a row, where if I was properly locked in and thinking correctly, I could have saved myself a lot of money. So we go from up almost $700 to now down $500 in just 2 hands. I'm annoyed at myself at this point as I realize my line just didn't make any sense, but I'm a stubborn fella, so I decided to rebuy for another $500 and get back to grinding. Unfortunately though, I didn't really film any more hands despite playing for another 2 hours. We were playing 5-handed and then 4-handed for a while, and the action was going really fast, and I didn't have the time to take a lot of notes, and it was just a lot of small pots, so let's just skip on to the outro. Alright, just wrapped up that session. Should have been a winning session. I punted a little bit. It happens. I was in the game for 1,300, cashed out for 980, so 320 loss. The King Jack hand should have folded. Pocket Jack's hand should have folded. We know I'm a calling station. This is a thing. So, results for the challenge right here. We're doing pretty good still. I just need to learn how to fold. Alright. That's it.